The basic idea is we went back to square one and tried to work out what we're trying to do. I guess our collective decision was very much that our suicide prevention network was to become a round table of the organisations and the people who are interested in doing something about suicide prevention. Now that meant that we needed to be pretty clear about what we're trying to do. Well, one of the things we're not trying to do was to help individual people through the network, because the network was a network of organisations who themselves do the work. So for a start, we didn't want to compete with them, because a number of the people in the network do not have the clinical training, myself very specifically. But also, there's a liability issue. Once you have an organisation who's doing something like that, if you do it wrong, you've got a problem if you're not trained. So it's very much about a forum of organisations, including people like the police, churches, all of the local health district, all of the anyone who comes from the local health professionals, Lifeline, anyone who's interested in doing something about suicide prevention in our community. So that became a really important issue about what is the extent of the work we did, and it was very much, we do not help individuals as a network, but we promote all the organisations that we deal with to do exactly that. So we try and facilitate that by getting everybody to around the table to talk to each other and set up connections and break down the Chinese walls, so you don't have to go through a protocol procedure to be able to get something happening for someone who's in crisis. Very important process, because there are some amazing Chinese walls that appear when someone's got a problem and needs help. So I don't want to go through all of the amazing amount of information that's already been set up about the mechanics of working a network. It's already there on that website, and Lifeforce have already got another set of procedures and principles for that, so there's plenty of information out there about that. I'd just like to talk about a few of the more specific issues that came up in the process of setting up the early networks, and Catherine's going to talk to us very much about then working with the community and the community networks and services and training, which is Catherine's absolute specialty. The resources you need to get something going. It's not rocket science, it's pretty basic stuff, but it's got to be done very carefully. One of the most important things with which to start is to deal with the awareness, the community awareness. Is the community aware, for a start, that there is a suicide prevention problem? There is a suicide problem. Does anyone suicide in your network, in your community? It's surprising how little information there is, because people don't like to talk about suicide. It's one of those words that people avoid, even in this day and age. So awareness is a very important part of the network's job. Dispelling the myths, which is one of the points that was made on the website, very important part. The old myths that we all know about you never talk to someone about suicide because they'll then go out and do it. You'll give them the idea. I mean, these things are so wrong, and there's lots of research that shows how wrong they are, but the community still believes in them. So very important to have awareness as one of your major objectives. Then you need to work out, does the community need it? We had one, I won't say where, but one particular area where I set up a network, the local coroner said, we don't bother doing anything about suicide. There's not enough to worry about now in our area. That's a pretty frightening statement. Clearly, there was very little awareness of what was actually going on. In fact, there were a lot of suicides in that area. So, awareness most important part of the whole process. Name is a very important thing. Choose the name carefully. Be right up front. Be very careful to tell people exactly what you're doing. Suicide prevention, probably add to it, and awareness. Don't be frightened of those words, because if you're frightened of them, the people you're trying to help will also be frightened of them. So be upfront about what you call yourselves. The resources you need a really dedicated, hard-working committee with skills. And it's not just people who put their hand up and say, oh, I'd like to be in that. It's really about having people who have skills that you need, and the skills go to a whole range of things. The first thing is you've got to have a good chair. And that's one of the keys to any of these networks. From the various networks I've set up, if you don't have the right chair, it sort of fizzles. And it's got to be someone who has the drive, who has the interest, and who has the determination to make it work, and has the skills and the connections to be able to connect to the community and convince the community that this is something worthwhile. A go-to person in the community is a very good place to start. But it also needs to be someone who has meeting skills, because networks are all about meetings. It's all about getting together around the table and solving problems. And if this person doesn't have meeting skills, you have a problem. You need a lot of community support, which means you need to go out there and get the community behind you. In order to get the community behind you, you've got to tell them why they should be supporting you. And you've got to convince them about what the whole thing is about, that the community does have a problem, that there are ways to fix it. And we all know there's a myth about you can't do anything about suicide. Another myth you need to get rid of. But you need to do this to get that information out there, to get the community behind you, which is so essential. You need to communicate with the community. Communicating with the community means you need some communication skills on your committee. Because if you don't have communication skills, you're not going to be very good at communicating with people. So it's really important to have someone who knows how to do that. But then you've got to be careful that, this is just a side issue, that only one person should speak for the community, for the network, because if everybody individually is speaking for the network and giving interviews, all of a sudden you find there's 15 different views out there about what the network's doing, and everybody gets confused and gives up. So very important to set up in the first place that there is a spokesperson for the network, and hopefully that's someone who has a good public profile in town, so that they can, in fact, be listened to when they speak. For the same reason, I think you need to have that person who has a high profile, but hopefully also can be a champion. And if it's not your chairman who's a champion, chairwoman, chairman, whatever, you need to have it's good to be able to find a champion who can lead the charge into the town and have people listen to what they say. Your community must be able to work together. Very important. If they're all going off in different directions, it doesn't help very much. They must have available time, and they must have the willingness to put time and effort into making things happen. My experience is very much that the way to get the community, get the network happening in the community, is to actually do lots of face-to-face meetings. It's wonderful to do media and TV interviews and newspaper interviews and what have you, but the thing that actually gets it happening is to pick the people in the community who are the influencers and go and have face-to-face meetings with them. And that's where you need someone who has the ability to front the network to these people, these influencers, and get them on side and get them convinced and get their organisation's resources behind you, because these are the resources you need to get this whole thing happening. One of the problems with these committees and groups is, of course, succession, that you don't get it. Once the chairman goes, the whole thing sort of fizzles. It's important to try and use subcommittees for a start to take the load off a small governing committee who are small enough to be able to get things done quickly and flexibly and easily, and have subcommittees who've got specific jobs like fundraising, like promotion, like all the various other activities that need to be done. And then by having these subcommittees, you can then suss out the people who are good, who can, when someone from the top committee goes, you've already got someone who knows what's going on, who you've tried, you understand them, bring them up onto the main committee. So it's the succession planning which makes the difference between a long-term project and a short-term project. An elevator statement is a very useful thing to happen. This is one of those things that comes out of American ideas, of course, with the name elevator, but it's very sensible. You need to be able to explain to someone in the time it goes, the lift, I'll use our term, goes from ground floor to third floor, about what it's about. Succinct statement of what you're doing or what a network's about. Because if you tell someone, I'm in a suicide prevention network, they'll say, what's a suicide prevention network? If you then spend 10 minutes talking to them about it, you've lost them. You need to be able to put it together quickly in 20 or 30 seconds. And if you can't do that, you won't get your message across. So an elevator statement
ding,
is...
Ding, ding.
Sorry?
Ding, ding, ding.
Right.
5 minutes.
Catherine, we'll get Catherine about being involved with the community and making that happen.
Thank you, Mort. Thank you. What Mort has talked about is very true, and when you are getting into a network, and you need to really connect with people that are active, and we were very lucky in having people in the network like Mort that had multiple connections. So many of our early events were through Rotary, for instance. Because Mort's connection with his Rotary membership, he was able to bring the network in their involvement with mental health. So together, Rotary and the network, the Suicide Prevention Network, held a number of mental health forums throughout our region, which were very successful. One of the other components of that success was that we were really cognizant that it was a scary topic. So what we wanted were people that could get a message across in a good way, that could engage an audience, that were knowledgeable. And we were again able, through our network, to locate people like that from places like Southern Cross University with Dr.
Rick Vanderswan.
Rick Vanderswan, thank you. So we started off doing things like that. We tried to engage our local council in creating a suicide prevention strategy within its social planning. That was not successful. However, we have and continue to have a good relationship with our council in that we apply for club grants or local city council grants, and they provide us with the money to provide applied suicide intervention skills training, which is the Living Works Assist, a 2-day workshop, or their Safe Talk. So we've been able to do that quite successfully, and sometimes we target it maybe to coaches and sporting people, maybe to aged care, maybe to schools, but more often than not we just open it to the general public, and we've had very good success with that. Other things that we've done is that we, in our roundtable discussions, what's working, what's not, what are people hearing within their own organisation or their own lived experience, that they could bring to the table in coming up with suggestions to making a difference. So some of the things I thought I'd just bring up here, we do Christmas memorials now in Port Macquarie and in Tanoni, which is a town close to Taree. Those memorials are about remembering the person who had suicide as a person, celebrating their lives. The idea behind that is if we can give someone space to remember that person in a good way, in a celebratory way, then it opens them up to be able to celebrate Christmas then with their other loved ones without the emotional turmoil that having a suicide often brings with that bereavement. So we do things like that now. We came up with a grief packet when we first started back in 2005. There wasn't much in the way of toolkits, and one of the ones we found was out of South Australia, I think, or Western Australia's had a state strategy on it. So we downloaded that, and it was a little bit of a booklet, but it was really interesting stuff. So we grabbed that, we showed our network, we had a committee looking at it, and they kind of felt that maybe that was a bit too big and too onerous for someone who had experienced either suicide or an attempted suicide to sort of plough through. So we came up with what we call a grief packet, and again this was, we were able to do this through a local grant. So someone that had experienced bereavement through suicide took this photo, designed the cover of this. So it's really a community effort. And inside we've broken it down. So another grant that we did was for community cards. And this was actually sponsored by Holiday Coast Credit Union. So they fold up like that. The idea is that they can be put into your wallet quite easily. But they've got all the emergency numbers, either state-based or local, that we could think of. And we've done that about 3 times now. We do upgrade them, but it's fairly static. But they've been very successful. The hospitals, the police department, and local organisations are always ringing up and asking if we can send them off a bundle. So also within this packet... 2 minutes. I'll be very quick. We've got Coping with Grief, a booklet about grief itself. We've got Lifeline information. We've got something that can be pulled apart and looked at, which, coping with grief and children with grief, what you need to do after someone has died through the government, and then specific toolkits through Lifeline about bereavement specific to suicide. So these are given out to people who have been bereaved by suicide. They're also given out to like the police and the hospitals, and they're very, very popular as well. Another thing we've done is looked at other resources that we can get very, very easily. One of the ones that we had a few years ago was taking care of yourself and your family through Beyond Blue. This was actually free. So the network ordered a whole bunch of these and had them sent out to the organisations as part of helping their volunteers or their workers to keep strong and remain resilient. Safe talk, mental health forums, community cards, grief packets, Christmas memorials. Walk Out of the Shadows is another thing that we do. We partner that with Lifeline. That's held on the 10th of September, which is Suicide Awareness Day. So we really try and get the community involved in those kinds of things. We do a lot of publicity around that. And again, we get organisations like Rotary, Lions Clubs, Lifeline, of course, to get involved in that, to spread the word and to help break down the stigma. So that's about what we've done. Could I just add one more thing? That this is something that's come up. Last year there was a Ministry Advisory Committee meeting in Port Macquarie, and from that someone with lived experience came to our network and said there's got to be something more that we can do. So through her participation within the network, we've now created a support group for those who have attempted suicide. And we're working with a company or a foundation in America that's got best practice for that. So again, someone hearing about what we do through a different medium has come into the network.
Great, thank you. Thank you both for your generosity in terms of sharing really on the ground experience. And